Stand in the middle of your garden for a moment and just listen. If you're like most modern growers, you probably hear a low, constant hum. Maybe the electric pump kicking on, the hiss of a pressurized timer, or just the sound of your own breathing after dragging 300 feet of heavy rubber hose across the yard. We've been taught to believe that moving water requires noise, and that noise requires electricity. I spent the first 10 years of my homesteading life fighting that battle. I bought pumps, ran extension cords, paid the electric bills. I thought I was investing in infrastructure, but I was actually investing in dependency. Every time the power flickered during a summer storm, my system stopped. Every time a pump gasket cracked, my plants waited. I was trying to force water to move using a wallet and a wall outlet, completely ignoring the enormous, invisible engine already sitting in my garden. Here's where we get the logic wrong. We look at a tomato plant on a hill and think we need a machine to push water up to it. We treat water like a stubborn mule that needs to be whipped into action. But history tells a different story. Long before the power grid, long before the combustion engine, and certainly long before the plastic irrigation timer, civilizations moved millions of gallons of water across empires without a single watt of electricity. They didn't use force, they used physics. If this is your first time here, we uncover the ancient engineering that modern technology tried to replace. Subscribe and hit the bell. What comes next could save you hundreds of dollars and free your garden from the grid forever. They understood that there's an invisible, heavy weight pressing on every square inch of your soil, your water tank, and your shoulders. It's called atmospheric pressure. Right now, the air above you is pushing with enough force to lift water 30 feet straight up if you just give it a path. This is the free energy source we've forgotten. It's constant, it never breaks down, and it costs nothing. What I'm about to show you isn't a new invention. It's ancient Roman hydraulic understanding applied to a $15 setup you can build with hardware store materials. We're going to stop fighting gravity and start using the weight of the atmosphere to do the heavy lifting for us. We're going to build a system that breathes. But first, you have to stop thinking about pumping water and start thinking about balancing it. Most garden failures happen because we try to act like a commander instead of a conductor. We try to order water where we want it, usually uphill, usually by force. When we carry a watering can, we fight gravity with our backs. When we install an electric pump, we fight gravity with a motor. In both cases, we're spending energy to overcome a fundamental law of physics. That's a battle you'll eventually lose, either through exhaustion or equipment failure. The Romans, and the Persians before them, didn't fight this battle. They understood a principle we often forget in our high-tech world. Water wants to find its level. If you take 2 containers of water and connect them with a tube at the bottom, the water levels will rise until they're perfectly equal. This is the principle of communicating vessels. It's passive, it's silent, and it's unstoppable. But here's the problem most of us face. Our water source is usually a barrel or tank, and the water has to get over the rim before it can flow down to the plants. This is where the siphon enters. A siphon is the bridge that lets us cheat the visual logic of the situation. When you drink a soda through a straw, you're not actually sucking the liquid up. You're removing the air from the straw, creating a vacuum. The dense atmosphere outside presses down on the liquid in the glass, forcing it up the straw to fill that empty space. Nature abhors a vacuum and will do the work for you to fill it. We're going to use exactly this same atmospheric pressure to power our entire system. By creating an airtight connection between your water source and your garden, we turn the whole setup into one connected vessel. The water isn't pumped. It's pulled by the weight of the water falling on the other side and pushed by the weight of the sky above it. Once you understand this, you stop worrying about horsepower and start worrying about ceiling. You realize the only thing standing between you and a self-watering garden is air. If you're finding value in this, hit the like button. Let's build the system. We start with the hardware. In the aisle of your local supply store, this looks like a standard 5-gallon bucket. Costs about $3. Shiny plastic and seemingly unremarkable. But to a self-sufficient homesteader who understands hydraulics, this isn't a bucket, it's a pressure chamber. This is the first layer of our machine, and it's where 90% of people fail, because they treat it like a simple container. To move water without a motor, we can't rely only on gravity pulling liquid down. We have to rely on vacuum holding it back. You need a container that can seal airtight. If you use a standard snap-fit lid, you're building a leak, and a leak breaks the physics. You need a lid with a rubber gasket, often called a gamma seal, or a drum with a screw-on cap. Next, we modify the container. We don't drape a hose over the rim. That's the amateur method. It creates a high point where air bubbles accumulate and eventually kill the siphon. Instead, we drill a hole in the lower sidewall and install a bulkhead fitting, a simple threaded connector with a silicone washer. When you tighten that nut, you're not just connecting a pipe, you're fusing the water line with the water source. What you have now is no longer a bucket, it's a closed circuit waiting to be energized. When you fill this container with water and screw on that gasket lid, you've trapped a specific volume of mass. The air inside is finite, the water inside is heavy. Now they're at a standoff. This airtight integrity is the only thing separating a controlled irrigation system from a chaotic flood. If air can sneak through a crack in the lid, gravity wins instantly and your tank drains in an hour. But if the container holds, we've domesticated gravity. We've created a loaded spring waiting for us to release the tension. Now we build the bridge. In a conventional system, this is just a hose. In our system, it's the lifeline. It's the hydraulic link that transfers the weight of your reservoir water to the root zones of your plants. We don't use clear vinyl tubing or heavy garden hoses. We use half-inch black polyethylene pipe, rigid enough to hold its shape but flexible enough to snake through the garden. And most importantly, it's opaque. If you let sunlight hit the water inside your bridge, algae will grow, the line will clog, and your bridge collapses. You connect this line to the bulkhead fitting on your container. At this point, you need to visualize the physics. You're creating a continuous column of water. Think of the water inside this tube not as a liquid, but as a solid chain. If you pull one end of a chain, the other end moves. In our hydraulic bridge, gravity pulls the water at the low end of the tube, and because the system is airtight, that water pulls the water behind it, which in turn draws water from the reservoir. This is where the Roman engineering enters. The Romans understood that water could travel over obstacles, like the side of a raised bed or a small rise in terrain, as long as the destination was lower than the source, and the line remained full. This is the siphon principle in action. You don't need a pump to push water over the wall of your raised bed. You just need the weight of the water falling on the other side to be heavier than the water being lifted. Run your main line from the reservoir to your beds. Keep it short and direct. Every foot of pipe adds friction, which steals energy from your system. Secure it to the ground with staples so it doesn't shift. Subscribe right now, because what comes next is the part that turns a flood into a precision irrigation system. If you stop now, you don't have an irrigation system. You have a flood. An open siphon will drain your 5-gallon reserve in 15 minutes, turning your bed into a swamp and leaving your plants thirsty for the rest of the week. We've harnessed gravity's energy, but now we must discipline it. We need to turn a stream into a pulse. This is the calibration layer. We do this by adding resistance. Take a simple punch tool and create a small hole in your half-inch main line. Into this, insert a 1/4-inch barbed connector and a length of microtubing that runs directly to the base of your plant. At the end of that tube, don't just leave it open. Install an adjustable drip emitter. These cost pennies, but they are the steering wheel of the entire vehicle. When you open that emitter, don't look for a stream. Don't look for a flow. You're looking for a hesitation. You want a drop that forms, hangs for a second, and then falls. That's nature's rhythm. Soil can't absorb water as fast as a hose can deliver it. When you hand water, half runs off. When you drip at this slow, agonizingly silent rate, the water doesn't run. It wicks into the soil by capillary action, spreading horizontally beneath the surface, creating a cone of moisture that reaches deep, right where the roots are waiting. Here's where you become the mechanic. Fill the reservoir, prime the siphon, then check the line. Tighten an emitter here for a small lettuce. Loosen one there for a thirsty tomato. You're balancing the atmosphere's pressure against the valve's friction. Once you've dialed it in, you can walk away. The physics doesn't change. As long as there's water in the reservoir and gravity on Earth, that emitter will maintain that drip rhythm, hour after hour, while you're inside eating dinner. The first time you set this up, you won't trust it. You'll walk out the next morning expecting to see an empty tank and a mud disaster, or a full tank and wilted plants. We're so accustomed to technology that requires constant monitoring, apps that send notifications, batteries that need changing, motors that hum, that silence feels like failure. But when you walk out on day 3 and then day 7, you'll see something boring. You'll see the water level in the tank has dropped exactly 3 inches. You'll see the soil around your peppers is dark and cool, and you'll hear absolutely nothing. That silence is the validation. Modern irrigation systems are fragile because they're complex. A digital timer is a computer sitting in the rain. A solenoid valve is a moving part that jams with dirt. If the power goes out, the programming is lost. If the battery dies, the valve stays shut. These are failure points we overpay for. In this container, there are no moving parts to break. The sensor is the physics itself. If it rains and air pressure shifts, the flow adjusts microscopically, but gravity remains constant. If heat rises, the plants drink what's there, and the slow drip continues replenishing the deep soil, not the surface crust. Physics doesn't glitch. It doesn't need a firmware update. The real test comes in August when you leave for a weekend. With an electric pump, if the source runs dry, the motor burns out. It screams until it dies. With a gravity siphon, if the tank runs dry, the flow simply stops. Air breaks the vacuum. The system creates a natural kill switch that protects itself. You come home, refill the container, purge the line, and the heartbeat starts again instantly. It's a fail-safe system. The only kind of system a self-sufficient homeowner should trust. There's a profound difference between a garden kept alive by technology and a garden kept alive by design. When you stand next to this $15 setup, you realize you've bought something far more valuable than a plastic bucket and some tubing. You've bought silence. You've bought the ability to walk away from your property without watching the power meter. You've bought independence from the grid, from the replacement parts aisle, and from the anxiety of wondering whether a timer battery died while you slept. This system doesn't hum, doesn't vibrate, doesn't add a single cent to your monthly bill. It just sits there, quiet and unremarkable, doing the work that civilizations did for thousands of years before we decided to complicate it. We often confuse complexity with effectiveness. We think that if a system has wires and screens, it must be better. But in the garden, simplicity is the only true form of durability. The more parts you add, the more things can break. Here, we've removed the parts. We've stripped the machine down to its absolute physics. You don't need to overhaul your entire property this weekend. In fact, you shouldn't. That's the enthusiast's mistake, not the grower's. Start with one bed. Get a bucket, a fitting, and a roll of pipe. Set it up on a Saturday afternoon. Watch it work for a week. Learn the rhythm of the drip. Adjust the height. Get familiar with the pressure. When you see that first tomato plant thriving under a silent, gravity-fed line, you'll understand. You'll realize you don't need more energy to grow food. You just need a little elevation, a little air, and the patience to let gravity do the rest. If this ancient logic changed how you see the resources in your own garden, subscribe and hit that like button. We're uncovering the sustainable wisdom that modern technology tried to replace. Grow your independence. The next blueprint for a resilient life will be revealed soon.